More than 7,900 stores are expected to close across the country this year alone, and grocery chains are no longer sitting on the sidelines of that number. Today we're looking at 12 grocery store chains that could disappear by 2027. This isn't a list of struggling startups nobody's ever heard of. These are names people grew up shopping at, names tied to Sunday errands and after-work stops for milk and bread. And when you look closely at what's happening behind the scenes, a pattern starts to emerge. Rising costs, shrinking margins, and customers who are done paying more for less. Number 12. Piggly Wiggly. There was a time when the pig on the sign meant something. A neighborhood grocer, a familiar aisle layout, a checkout clerk who knew your name. Piggly Wiggly built its identity on being the store that was always just around the corner, in small towns across the Midwest and Southeast. But lately, that corner is getting emptier. Locations in Alabama and Wisconsin have quietly shut their doors, citing aging equipment, month-to-month leases, and financial strain that's harder to hide every year. What makes this story different is that Piggly Wiggly isn't losing a war against a flashy competitor. It's losing to the slow grind of rising costs that never seem to stop climbing. And when a store that's been part of a community for generations goes dark, the loss isn't really about groceries. It's about losing one more piece of a town that used to feel permanent. Number 11, Homeland. If you live in Oklahoma, there's a good chance Homeland has been part of your life for decades. Founded on the idea of serving communities that bigger chains overlooked, Homeland grew into a familiar name across the state. But this year, the company announced it's closing, consolidating, and selling off locations as part of a major restructuring, with stores shutting down in a matter of weeks rather than months. The reasons aren't unique to Homeland. E-commerce keeps growing, big box competitors keep expanding, and a regional grocer with a smaller footprint simply doesn't have the same room to absorb rising costs. What's telling is how ordinary the closures feel. No dramatic announcement, no scandal, just quiet consolidation that leaves fewer options every time it happens. And in smaller communities, fewer options isn't a minor inconvenience. It's the difference between a 5-minute drive and a 30-minute one. Number 10, Tops Friendly Markets. Tops built its reputation the old-fashioned way, investing in renovations, adding fuel stations, and doubling down on the neighborhood grocery experience. But even a chain that's actively renovating some locations is quietly closing others when leases expire and nearby stores make a location redundant. That's the uncomfortable truth about grocery retail right now. Even the chains that look like they're investing in their future are still trimming stores at the same time. For customers who've shopped at the same Tops for years, a closure like that doesn't feel like part of a smart business strategy. It feels like losing a place that was supposed to always be there. Number 9, Grocery Outlet. Grocery Outlet built its entire brand around one idea: bargain hunting. Deeply discounted, overstocked, and close-out products that let customers stretch a grocery budget further than almost anywhere else. For years, that formula worked especially well during economic downturns, when shoppers wanted savings without sacrificing brand names. But in 2026, the company announced it would close 36 stores nationwide, a move its own CEO described as the result of a strategic misstep. That's a strange thing to hear from a discount grocer, during a period when discount shopping should be booming. It suggests the problem isn't that people stopped wanting bargains. It's that Grocery Outlet expanded faster than its model could support, and now it's paying for growth that outpaced demand. And that's what makes this story worth watching. Sometimes a company doesn't fail because customers walked away. It fails because it walked too far ahead of them. Number 8, Winn-Dixie. For a century, Winn-Dixie was practically synonymous with grocery shopping in Florida. Familiar aisles, a familiar mascot, and a footprint that stretched across the Southeast at its peak. But after years of ownership changes and financial pressure, Winn-Dixie's parent company sold the brand to Aldi, and now dozens of locations across Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi have either closed, converted to other grocery brands, or been absorbed entirely. Some Winn-Dixie stores are becoming Aldi locations, others are becoming Piggly Wiggly or Food City, and a few are simply disappearing altogether. What's left is a smaller, more concentrated version of the brand, focused almost entirely on Florida. For longtime shoppers in Alabama or Georgia, that means the Winn-Dixie they grew up with may not exist in their state much longer. And when a 100-year-old grocery name gets absorbed piece by piece into other brands, it's rarely a sign of stability. It's usually a sign the original identity has already started to fade. Number 7. Stop and Shop. Ask anyone in the Northeast about Stop and Shop, and you'll probably hear a story about a Sunday grocery run that's been part of their routine for years. But that routine is getting interrupted more and more often. Owned by Dutch grocery giant Ahold Delhaize, Stop and Shop has closed dozens of stores in recent years, with new closures in New Jersey adding to a list that keeps growing. The company insists each decision is made independently, not as part of a broader plan. But when locations keep disappearing one after another, that distinction starts to feel less important to the customers losing their nearest store. The pressure comes from every direction. Grocery prices climbed nearly 3% this year alone. Labor and transportation costs keep rising, and warehouse clubs, Walmart, Aldi, and online grocery delivery keep chipping away at foot traffic. Stop and Shop still operates hundreds of stores across the Northeast, but the company is clearly choosing to invest in its stronger locations, which means the weaker ones are running out of time. Number 6. Save-A-Lot. Save-A-Lot spent decades serving a very specific promise: rock-bottom prices in neighborhoods that often had few other grocery options. For customers stretching every dollar, that made Save-A-Lot more than a convenience. It made it a lifeline. But the discount grocery space has gotten brutally competitive. Aldi has expanded aggressively into the exact market Save-A-Lot once had to itself. And with a larger, better-funded footprint, Aldi has been steadily outcompeting smaller discount chains on price, selection, and store experience. Save-A-Lot has responded by closing underperforming locations and shifting more of its stores toward a franchise model, which shrinks the company's direct footprint even as individual stores keep operating under new ownership. That shift might keep the name alive, but it also means less central control over consistency, and inconsistency is exactly what makes customers start looking elsewhere. For a brand built on being the reliable low-price option, losing that reliability may end up being the bigger threat. Number 5. Safeway. A century-old name, millions of loyal shoppers, and a brand so recognizable that it's practically a synonym for grocery store in some parts of the country. That's Safeway. But since being acquired by Albertsons a decade ago, Safeway has become one of the primary targets in Albertsons' ongoing wave of closures. A dozen Safeway locations have shut down this year alone, part of a broader consolidation effort following the collapse of Albertsons' proposed merger with Kroger. When that $24.6 billion deal fell apart, both companies pivoted hard from expansion to cost-cutting, and Safeway's aging store network made it an easy place to start trimming. What's notable is that these closures aren't concentrated in one struggling region. They're happening state by state, store by store, in a slow rollout that rarely makes national headlines but adds up fast. And for a brand that built its identity on being the dependable neighborhood grocer, that kind of quiet erosion may end up being more damaging than one dramatic announcement ever could. Number 4. Vons and Cars. Technically separate banners, but both owned by Albertsons and both facing the exact same pressure. Vons has been a fixture in Southern California for generations, while Cars has served Alaska's more remote communities with a level of dedication that's hard to replace. But this year, both brands saw locations close, including a longtime Vons store in Escondido, California, and a Cars store in Anchorage. What makes these closures sting more than most is the lack of alternatives. In dense Southern California suburbs, a closed Vons might mean a longer drive. But in parts of Alaska, a closed Cars can mean the nearest full grocery store is now hours away instead of minutes. Albertsons hasn't publicly detailed the exact reasoning behind most of these individual closures, but the pattern lines up with everything else happening across the company. Consolidate, cut costs, and protect the locations that are still performing well. For communities depending on these specific stores, that strategy doesn't feel like consolidation. It feels like abandonment. Number 3. Big Lots. Not a traditional grocery chain, but for millions of families relying on its discounted household goods and pantry staples, Big Lots functioned like one. After filing for bankruptcy, hundreds of Big Lots locations landed on closure lists, and what makes this story so striking is the irony behind it. Discount retailers are supposed to benefit when the economy gets tighter. Instead, Big Lots discovered that when budgets get squeezed hard enough, even a deeply discounted mattress or pantry staple becomes a purchase people postpone. That's the trap facing more than just Big Lots. When your entire business model depends on customers having a little extra room in their budget. And that room disappears completely. There's no price cut low enough to bring shoppers back in the door. Number 2, Kroger. This one might be the most surprising name on today's list because Kroger isn't a struggling regional chain. It's one of the largest grocery companies in the country, operating more than 1,200 stores under its own name alone. But after its proposed merger with Albertsons collapsed, Kroger announced an 18-month plan to close 60 stores, representing about 5% of its entire network. As of this year, nearly 40 of those locations have already shut down across more than a dozen states, from California to Wisconsin. The company describes these as underperforming stores being trimmed to strengthen the business long-term. But for the employees losing their jobs and the customers losing their closest grocery option, that explanation doesn't change what's actually happening. What makes Kroger's situation worth paying attention to is the scale. When one of the biggest grocery companies in America starts cutting 5% of its footprint, it's not an isolated business decision. It's a signal about where the entire industry is heading. Number 1, the entire traditional supermarket model itself. Because if there's one thing every chain on this list has in common, it's not bad luck or bad management. It's that the traditional supermarket, the kind built around wide aisles, full-service departments, and a store on every corner, is being squeezed from every direction at once. Walmart and Costco keep expanding their grocery footprint with lower prices and bigger bulk savings. Aldi keeps growing at a pace almost no traditional grocer can match. Online grocery delivery keeps pulling customers away from in-store visits entirely. And dollar stores keep absorbing the smallest, most frequent purchases that used to belong to neighborhood grocers. Analysts who track this space have been warning about it for years, describing the rise of discount and big-box grocers as an existential threat to traditional supermarkets, the same kind of threat that hollowed out department stores over the last 2 decades. U.S. retailers are projected to close nearly 7,900 stores this year alone, and a meaningful share of that number belongs to grocery chains that once felt untouchable. That's what makes this list different from most closure stories. It's not really about any single brand failing. It's about an entire category of retail being forced to prove it still deserves a place in people's routines. Looking back at everything on today's list, the most interesting part isn't any single chain by itself. People still need groceries. They still need a place to buy milk, bread, and dinner for tonight. What's changing is which stores get to be that place. Some chains are being absorbed into competitors. Some are shrinking down to their strongest markets. Some are disappearing from entire states they served for decades. But all of them are facing the same underlying pressure: rising costs, changing habits, and customers who are paying closer attention to where their money goes than they ever have before. And I'm curious to ask you this: out of everything on today's list, which store closing would actually change your weekly routine? And is there a grocery chain near you that's already started feeling different? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read almost every comment, and quite a few of these videos start with the stories you share.